Okay, hello, I am Erica Sin and I am the Director of Tutoring at Arbor Bridge. We are an SAT, ACT test prep company based out of the United States. And I'm going to give you some overall information on these exams, which you will likely need to take if you are looking to apply to US universities. So I'm going to give you some information on the exams in general and then how to choose the best exam for you. So the first thing that I want to give you an overview of is the actual content and format of the exam. So one thing to keep in mind is that you can take either the SAT or the ACT for your college applications. So to give you an idea of the content and format, the SAT has reading, writing and languages, which is really grammar, math, and then an essay, which is optional. The ACT has a very similar subject matter, except there is a section called science, which is more about interpreting data and graphs and charts and things like that. The scoring is where it's quite different. The SAT is out of a total of possible 1,600, and the ACT is out of a total of 36. So I'll go a little bit more into detail of how those scores actually correspond later. But one big thing that changed probably in the last 5 to 7 years is that neither exam has a guessing penalty anymore. So with the exams, the content tends to be largely similar, but the format of the questions are quite different. So depending on how your brain processes information, usually students will lean one way or the other for the exams. So just the general idea of what type of student might lean towards one exam or the other. The SAT, usually students tend to be stronger in reading. They're good with inferences. The SAT tends to have more flowery testing language. So you spend more time trying to understand what the question is asking you. So because of that, you'll get more time per question. There's also a non-calculator section of the math. So you do need to be able to do math quickly without a calculator. The ACT, on the other hand, usually students are stronger in science. You are better at sticking with facts. So it's a lot more about recall. So understanding how to refer quickly back to the passages, but there is more time pressure. So it's more about moving more efficiently and quickly through the test. So in choosing the exam, some steps that we recommend for students is number one, to take full-length diagnostic exams, to also look at test availability, so seeing when those exams are actually offered in your country, and then verifying super scoring policies for the universities that you're looking into, which I will go into in just a little bit as well. So scoring and percentiles. So just to give you an idea, like I mentioned before, the scoring scales are quite different. And the way in which we compare these exams is we use percentiles. Now, what does a percentile actually mean? So percentile basically shows how you compare to all the students that have taken these exams. So the idea of a standardized test is to show you in comparison to all the students that are applying. So this ranks you in terms of the percentage of students that you perform better than on these tests. So the reason I show this to you is because you'll see that 100 points at the top end of the SAT scale, or the top 3 points of the ACT scale, that is the top 1 percentile of students who take this test. So 100 points at the very top is very different from 100 points in the middle. So you'll see a 1,300 to a 1,350, which is even just a 50-point span, will span 13 percentile points. So what that means is that as you get further higher and higher into a scoring range, that actually gets more and more competitive because those extra top points are more difficult to earn. So the reason I present that is because we'll work with a lot of students, or people will come to us and say, I just need an extra 100 points or an extra 50 points. 50 points at different levels are very different. So just understanding how how that is differentiated between the entire scoring scale can be helpful to understand, you know, what the scores actually mean and what you need for your different applications. The other thing to think about is super scoring. So this is more prevalent for the SAT than the ACT, though that's starting to shift a little bit. So super scoring will basically allow you to take your best section scores across multiple sittings of the official exams. So in this example here, you'll see that the math section, this student scored much better in the June math section than the October, but their verbal score went up in October. So super scoring allows them to combine these two top scores to submit that higher score of 1210 to the universities. The reason we present this is because a lot of students will want to, yes, in an ideal world, take the official test once and then be done with it. But that almost is never the case. Students, in our experience, 90% of our students improve the second time they take the exam. And that's because you have the experience of going through the official test, going to the testing center, and being able to be under that test-like pressure as opposed to being at home. And so that experience really helps you overall in actually performing well and improving your score. So giving yourself the opportunity to do that and really planning out when you're going to take the official exam is an important part of your overall testing plan. So in speaking about your official test timeline, the steps that you need to take is to, number one, pick which exam you're going to take, the SAT or the ACT. So once you figure out which test you're going to take, the next thing, and this is largely due to COVID at this point, so generally we recommend students choose 3 dates, but with COVID and the number of cancellations and delays that have been happening, we're recommending that students choose 4 potential dates. And so figuring out when you can take those official exams and doing it in a way that that you can balance your workload with school is also very important, because your school scores are honestly probably getting to be more and more important in your overall application. So making sure that you can balance everything accordingly, and then also verifying that those scores or that those dates are actually offered in your country. So those are all things that we can help advise you in as well. But helping lay out when you're going to take the official test helps you figure out how much preparation you might need as well. And that also helps you figure out your schedule, your study plan, and hopefully get you to your best score. So probably a relevant conversation right now, and something that's been happening more and more. There's been this large trend of universities going test optional, especially with all the cancellations that have been happening. One thing to remember is that there's a very big difference between test optional and test blind. There's a very small handful of schools that are test blind, which means that even if you do submit a score, they're not going to look at it at all. So there's absolutely no bearing that a test score can have on your overall consideration. Test optional, on the other hand, means that it's not required, but if you do send the score to them, they will look at them and look at them in your overall application. So you can have a student that submits them, a student that doesn't. They'll still look at both of your applications, but they will still look at your score if you submit it. So that being said, it means that while a score will not necessarily get you over the threshold and get you into the door, if you have a score that is comparable or within range of what students typically do, or even exceed what they typically accept, that can help you overall. And so that's why we are still advising that students plan on taking these tests, because most schools at this point are test optional and not test blind. So that's a really key difference to understand on these exams. So then getting to the important part, how do you choose an actual exam? So what we recommend students do is that you take a full diagnostic test for both the SAT and the ACT. So that is something that we offer. And ideally, the timeline to do this is to take the test at the end of grade 10 or right before grade 11. So usually that holiday time between your grades is a good time to do it, because you can most students will take the official test during grade 11. So having that plan set out that I mentioned before can be very useful. In terms of taking the tests, do you need to take both exams? Absolutely not, which is why we have you choose which exam you want to take in the beginning. So again, planning is key in this. And then another thing we hear sometimes from students is, are some test dates better than others or easier than others? That's not the case. The point of a standardized test is to normalize for any variance in that. That's not to say that sometimes there are skewed scales that happen, and that unfortunately is not something you can predict or prepare for. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, most tests are completely equal. It's really about finding those test dates that work best for your schedule and your workload. So yeah, that's sort of an overall plan, and I guess that's sort of the overall sense of the exams. Arjun, did you have any particular questions about the?
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Erica. That was quite a smart overview for all the testing that students have to sort of deal with. And of course, when I say deal with, the thing that comes to mind most as a counselor is when students call up saying, yet again, our test got canceled, or the center, the computers did not work, or there was even a power outage, or anything else that kind of, or in some other country, there was a issue of a test leakage. So what advice do you give students? I'm sure they call you as well when things that happen, which is beyond their control. How do you tell them to power on?
I think what we like to tell all of our students is to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So you want to be prepared as if that test is going to happen. And if it is canceled for whatever reason, so number one, this is why we're advising that students have those backup test dates signed up for, so you know that you have that additional opportunity if you need to take it, and if anything happens to that original plan. But also, once you are prepared for an official test date, yes, there's a little bit of, when you're anticipating something and then it doesn't happen, and then you sort of have to internalize that and say, okay, well, at least now you've prepared for it and you can continue practice, but smartly, not just taking practice tests over and over again. That's not necessarily the best way to prepare, but, making sure that, I guess the best thing that I can compare it to is preparing for a sport. Think of all the people that trained for the Olympics and it was canceled, and they're going to have to prepare for it next year. They're going to continue to train and keep up what they've done up to that point, but at least you've laid all the groundwork. You've done the heavy lifting of what you need to prepare for. So it's much more about maintaining that level that you can achieve, as opposed to starting from scratch.
Right. The other thing I've noticed over the years is students who've taken on online tutoring, one-to-one online tutoring. There's been largely a very positive sort of feedback or response from them. There's obviously a hesitation when parents feel that maybe a small group class in a neighborhood test prep center would prepare them well. So if we look at two issues here, one is the one-on-one online, and the second is because of how the world has adapted and there's its new sort of normal now of working, even just doing this Zoom call with you, very informal, having these conversations. Earlier, it would take weeks to say, okay, maybe I'll do this call, but now we just go on and just do it. So I think this is great. What have you seen since your entire practice has been virtual for as many years as I've known it to be? What's the experience like now for students, and how quickly have the parents adapted to the fact that this is the best way to do it?
Well, I think what's interesting is that, and I would have conversations with families before, and we would talk about, okay, we do our lessons, but we've been using Zoom for the last 7 years. So, we've been very familiar with it. And even last year at this time, when some students or parents, we would talk to them about that and they would have a little hesitation. But now everyone is familiar. It is the one thing about COVID is that it's forced everyone to become comfortable with online interaction. And what's nice is that because we've largely dealt with this, the way that we've built our curriculum and the way that we've built our studies has been geared around online studying. You know, we haven't tried to kind of stick a round peg in a square hole with saying, you know, this is what we've done in person and then trying to make that happen online. No, this is how we've built our program. So I think, you know, given the comfort factor that a lot of families have now, they're becoming more open to it, and even defaulting to this, especially knowing it's still unknown as to what's happening with in-person versus hybrid. I know a lot of students are going back to school and it's a mix of both, but it might go back to online. And so just having that uncertainty in that arena, but having a consistent knowing, okay, consistency knowing I'm meeting online with my tutor, you know, I know this isn't going to get canceled because of anything. That I think is a big assurance for a lot of families now, just knowing that there's going to be consistency.
Thank you, Erica. This has been quite insightful for me to get a recap of the testing and the changes, and of course the new one, test blind. So it's fun to always be on top of the information that students need as counselors. I'm so delighted to welcome you at the college fair and look forward to directing questions your way. And I'm sure students would reach out and ask you in the attendee list. They can just write to you and connect with you. So, so long. Let's meet on Friday. And all the best.
Yeah, thank you so much. Excited to see you then.